Hi, this is Jamie Powell from INSYDIUM. In this tutorial, we're going to be using the Taiao Plant object to procedurally design and generate our own palm tree rig. The first thing we'll do is open up our reference image so that we can have a look at the type of palm tree that we're going to be designing. So because this palm tree has grown on quite weak sand, it looks like it's tilted over at some point in its life and then continued to grow upwards. It's also fatter at the base, and this is the characteristic palm tree trunk that we're going to be building. At the top we have this nodule, of which grows our main branches and then the leaves from those branches. So we're getting this order of hierarchy that we can copy with our Taiao plant. Let's go back to our scene where we have this Terraform Effects sand terrain. We've also got this very basic light rig too. And inside of this objects group, there's a very lonely coconut that we're going to build into our tree later on. So let's fold this up and we'll bring in a Taiao plant. We'll go to the INSYDIUM menu, Taiao, and then at the top here we have Taiao plant. When we click that, it goes into our object manager and we have everything we need in here. So we can add layers, change the global settings, and we can do lots more too. If we unfold this add part menu, we're going to see lots of different layers that we can bring into our tree. So we can have growth points, and we're not going to look at that in this video, but we can bring in trunks, branches, leaves, flowers, and then custom objects like a coconut, for example. Let's bring in a trunk, and now we've got the trunk inside of our objects menu, and we can also see the trunk inside of the viewport. Let's go ahead and bring in a branch and also a leaf layer too. And when we do that, you can see that they are automatically stacking in this hierarchy. So the leaf is a child of the branch, which is a child of the trunk. And in the viewport, we can see the leaves are attached to the branch, which are in turn attached to the trunk. So you get this kind of character rig build for your tree. Let's delete both the leaf layer and the branch layer. And we're going to look at the trunk settings, and to do that, all we need to do is click the trunk layer. So let's click that and we'll go down to the settings here. And you'll note that we've got three tabs: main, gravity, and materials. And for this video, we're just going to ignore the materials tab and focus on the actual building tabs. So we have the main tab for our trunk, which gives us the ability to change the height, radius, profile, and all sorts of other things too. Then in gravity, we can bend our trunk over in the way that gravity would pull over an object over time. Let's just extend this panel upwards and we'll go back to the main tab. Now let's increase the height. We'll go for 455 centimeters, and we'll also increase the radius to 30 centimeters. So we can see in the viewport that our trunk is thinner towards the top than it is at the bottom. And this is a result of the default profile spline. And the y-axis of this spline defines the radius of the trunk, and the x-axis defines the length of the trunk. So with this spline, we get this look in the viewport. So let's bring this point down to the same level as the other point. And now we have this uniform trunk. So you can see the relationship between this spline and the way that the trunk looks in the viewport. Let's go back up to how it was before and reduce the height on the point at the end to get a thinner trunk at the end. So we can use this profile spline to bring in that nodule that we saw in the reference image. Let's hold down Control and click here to create a new point, and we'll bring this point down to level off with our other point. Let's change the handle angle like so, and then we're going to hold down Control and click here to bring another point into our spline, and let's raise this one up. We'll also extend these handles outwards, take our last handle and point this upwards. So we can see that we've made this nodule at the top of our trunk, but we want to just shorten it, so we can do that with these points by just moving them over towards the right hand side. And there we have it. Now if we go to the gravity tab, we can change the strength of the gravity to bend our trunk over. Let's increase this all the way up to 100%. And now we've bent that trunk over to the left-hand side. So because we've got this nodule on the top of our trunk, we can pull this weight point up to imply that it's heavier towards the end of the trunk. So if we go back to the main tab, remember that we've got this profile spline which describes the length of our trunk. So this is the base and this is the top. So now we have this nodule in the profile of our trunk. Let's go to the gravity tab and have a look at this weight spline, which maps the strength of our gravity, which is on the y-axis of the graph, to the length of the trunk, which is along the x-axis of the graph. And because we have this fatter nodule at the end of our trunk, we want there to be a bit more gravity affecting the end of the trunk. So let's just lift this point up on the graph to imply that there's more strength of gravity pulling it over towards the ground. Now let's go back to the main tab and we'll bring this menu down to the bottom. You can see we have settings for deformation on the trunk, and we'll look at that in just a second. We've got furling settings, which we'll look at now. We've also got trunk root flares, which gives us the ability to add flares to the bottom of our trunk. But because our palm tree doesn't have any flaring, we're going to ignore that. Let's go to the furling angle, and we're going to reduce this angle to a point where we can see that our palm tree is pointing back upwards, like so. So minus 103 degrees looks good, but we want this to happen a little bit earlier in the length of our trunk, because as you can see, this is only affecting the latter 50% of the trunk. So we can use the bias slider to do that. Let's pull this back to about 40%, and there we go. We're getting this trunk that resembles our reference image. So just note that the default settings with our Taiao plant are going to be quite low resolution. Let's display this by going to the viewport's display settings and changing this to go rod shading with lines. So now we can see the polygons that are making up our trunk. We can change this by increasing the ring segments. Let's increase this to 20, and now we can see many more segments around our trunk. And if we go to the global settings of Taiao Plant, we have this segment resolution, which by default is set to 10 centimeters, and that's describing the height of our polygons. If we reduce this to, let's say, 5 centimeters, we're going to get more polygons, creating our trunk. And because this is a global setting, we're also going to be increasing the resolution and therefore the quality of the other layers in our Taiao plant. We could disable use resolution, and then when we do that, our trunk loses quality because we've instructed Taiao Plant to give us the ability to increase segment counts on a per layer basis. So if we increase this to, let's say, 50, we get that quality back, and then we can customize each layer's quality. Let's go back to the global settings though, and let's just make this global once more by enabling use resolution. So now all of our layers will retain a high quality. Let's go back to the display settings and opt for the go rod shading again, just to get rid of those lines from the viewport. So now if we go back to our plant layers tab in Taiao Plant, we're going to bring in some branches. So we just bring down this drop down menu for adding a new part, and we'll click branch. And that's automatically added our branch layer underneath the trunk as a child. Let's take the branch count down to 0, and we can see we have this funny looking branch on the top. And this is accurate for some trees, but not for our palm tree. So all we need to do to eliminate that is to disable branch on end. That's going to get rid of that top branch. Now let's increase our branch count to 36. And now we've got all of these beautiful branches being spawned from our trunk. So clearly this doesn't look like a palm tree anymore, and that's because the branches are being grown lower down on the trunk than they should do. We can change this by going to the distribution tab. That's here. So remember the profile spline. This is acting in the same way, but for where the branches are being grown on the trunk. So at the moment, this is saying, don't grow any branches from the base until we reach this halfway point, and then do grow branches all the way up to the top. And we can demonstrate this by moving these points either to the left. We're pulling the distribution of those branches over towards the base of our trunk, but we want these to be grown from that nodule at the top, so we're going to take them all the way up to the right hand side like so. Now let's go back to the main tab, and we're going to make these look a little bit more like palm tree branches. Let's go down to the profile spline of these branches, and we're just going to take these points all the way down to the bottom to reduce the branch's thickness. Let's take this first point and take it down as well, so that they're less thick towards the base. And if we go to this last point, let's just bring this handle up so we are rounding off the tips of those branches. Now we just need to make these branches longer, and we can do that with the branch length here. So we want the branch length at around 350 centimeters. So we'll leave it at 349. And then let's give it some variation so that these branches are varied in their length. Now let's increase the branch angle so that they're angled up towards the sun. Let's go for about 30 degrees. We'll give them some variation too, so let's say 10%. And then if we go down to the bottom, we can furl these down towards the ground. Let's go for 90 degrees of furling, and then we're just going to reduce the bias so that they're starting to furl closer towards their base. So that's starting to look really good. We're getting that palm tree look. Now let's bring in some leaves. So we'll go back to the top menu here. We have the Add Part drop-down menu. Let's just go down and bring in some leaves. Now the leaves are automatically underneath the branch in the hierarchy. They're being spawned from the branch, and we can simply increase this leaf count. So let's put 300 leaves in, and there we go, we've got the leaves. Let's dolly into one of these branches, and we're going to make these look a little bit more like palm tree leaves. So the first thing we'll do is go to the Distribution tab in the leaf layer, and we're going to change the type from Fibonacci spiral to alternate. Now at the moment these are facing the wrong way, they're vertically aligned. We want these to be horizontally aligned. So let's twist them around the branch by 90 degrees. We'll also change the angle so that they are forwards facing, and that's kind of giving us that iconic palm tree look. So go for 45 degrees on that, and we'll give this 5% variation. At the moment they've all got the up vector of y plus on the world axis. So let's give this some variation too. We'll go for 10%. So let's just go to the Geometry tab. We're going to change the shape of the leaves. First, we'll change the length. Let's increase this to quite a large length of around 60 centimeters. And now let's change the leaf profile. So we know that they stem from the base of the leaf. They come to a fine tip, so we'll reduce that down too. And now if we hold down Control and click in the middle, we can make them wider in the middle, which is exactly how a palm tree looks. So let's pull this back towards the left-hand side, and that'll do fine. Let's double the length and the width segments, so 8 and 4, just to get some more detail. And we'll add some size variation too, so that they're not all exactly the same size. 6% is fine. Now let's go up to the main tab, and we'll go to the furling here at the bottom. Let's furl these downwards towards the ground as if they're dehydrated and they're starting to droop. So we'll go for, let's say 30 degrees, and then we're going to change the bias. Let's reduce this so that they are drooping, they're furling from closer to their stem. Now if we look at one of these branches, let's keep our eye on this one here. We don't quite have the correct characteristics of the palm tree branch yet, and that's because we need to redistribute these leaves. So we have less at the start of the branch in our reference image. So we're going to take this point and bring it all the way down, and then push it over to the right hand side. And therefore we're saying have less leaves towards the base of our branch, but have more towards the end. Let's just bring this one over to the left hand side so that we're increasing the count towards the middle of the branch. And now we'll also change the scale along branch spline too. So we want them to be at their longest in the middle of the branch. So we'll hold down Control and click and create this point in the middle. And we want them to be smaller towards the back of the branch. We'll bring this point down, and also towards the end of the branch, we want them to be smaller as well. Let's just change the angle on this handle, and let's just raise this up too so they're a little bit longer. Now if you don't want to have this middle leaf here, we can go back to the main tab and deselect leaf on end. Let's do that. Let's just realign our camera to that default view and admire our palm tree. So the next thing we'll do is just add some of those lonesome leaves coming from the nodule of the trunk itself, just to break up the perfection at the top there. So let's go to our object, we'll click the trunk, then click this leaf layer, and that's instantly become a child of the trunk. So we can fold up this branch now. Let's call these top leaves. And let's make it so that we have 60 of them. If we go back to that distribution tab, we can change it so that they are positioned right towards the top of our trunk, so not at the bottom. Let's just change this handle, and there we go. If we go to the geometry tab, we can increase their length. So let's go for 60 centimeters. Let's just make the leaf profile the same as we had it before. So we'll take these points and bring them down, like so. And it looks like we've got too many at the bottom just underneath this nodule. So let's also just bring this point up a little bit higher. There we go. Now if we go back to the geometry tab, we can increase the length and width segments. And we can also go to the main tab. And let's just add that furling again to bend them over towards the ground like that. We'll reduce the bias slightly. Let's add some deformation just to make them less perfect. So we'll increase the turbulence and the scale. Let's put the scale at 20%. And let's fold these too. We want to fold them negatively. Just dolly into those just to see how they're looking. They're looking good, but we need a little bit of variation in their lengths. And we also want them to get smaller towards the base of the trunk. So let's go to the geometry tab where we can give them some size variation. That looks great. And if we go to the distribution tab at the bottom, we've got the same scale along branch. So if we look at the position on branch spline, we know that this is where we're getting the leaves. So we can just create a new point here. Let's just put it down. And there we go. We're seeing them reduce in their scale now towards that point in the trunk. Let's get rid of this point here because we don't need it anymore. And that will work just fine. So let's just dolly out once more. And we'll go to this objects menu and let's add a new part. So we'll just disable the main branch and the top leaves. We'll click the trunk again and add a new branch layer. So these are going to be the branches that our coconuts hang from. So we'll call this the coconut branches layer. Let's go to the distribution tab. We'll take both of these points and push them all the way back up to the top nodule. Let's go to the main tab. We'll go to the profile and let's pull both of these points so that the branches are thinner. Let's get rid of that top branch too, so turn off branch on end. And we don't want them to be so long, so we can reduce their length 90 centimeters. And let's bend them over with the furling. And let's also give this some gravity. In fact, we can reduce the furling now. So let's just take that furling back a little bit. Like that. Looks a little bit alien all of a sudden, but we can get some coconuts on this and it'll look much better. So in fact, let's just bring the length down to 68 centimeters. Reduce the count. Let's give this only 6. And now we can add our coconuts to the coconut branches layer. Let's add a part. We'll add a custom object. That's become a child of our coconut branches. And because we have our coconut object in the scene group here at the top, here's our coconut, we can just simply drop this into our custom object panel here at the bottom, and we have got our coconuts. So let's just dolly in and we can assess how this looks. So we can immediately see that they're upside down, so we need to rotate them 180 degrees on the y-axis. We want them to be positioned lower than our branches, so let's bring them down to about there. And actually our branches need to be changed slightly to be thinner, so we'll do that shortly. And let's scale them up. So we will just increase this object size. Let's double it to 2. Let's give this some variation. And let's also reduce the spawn frequency so that we get less coconuts in our scene. So let's just change the profile of our branches. We'll go to the Profile Spline and reduce the base. And let's just reduce the tip too and round it off like so. There we go. That looks good. So the last thing we're going to demonstrate is to create these coconuts with the standard custom objects rather than using this coconut object. Let's go to our plant custom objects layer, and we'll just delete this coconut from the custom object menu. So now we get these cylinders in the scene. Let's just dolly back in so we can see those. And we just need to change the length of these to make them longer, like this. So let's put this at 11 centimeters. We've got everything else set up, and we just need to change the profile. So let's create a point in the middle. We'll take these points down to the bottom, and let's just increase the length on these handles to make this a little bit more coconut-like, like so. And lastly, we'll just increase the subdivisions. And now we've got our own procedurally generated coconuts that adorn our beautifully made palm tree created with the Taiao Plant object.